Okay, so we have been changing things up a bit this year and starting with a question that we get from a lot of the people that we coach. So the last 2 episodes, we covered a question. And today, the question is, how do you lead a group of very different people?
That's a tough one.
That is a tough question because you could go a lot of different directions too.
Totally.
Because you're like, you want to know exactly how? Well, first of all, it's going to be relative to where you're at and your personality and things like that. But I thought I would start with this really interesting story that happened to me recently when I was training for a PR group out in DC. So we were doing this personality assessment called Insights Discovery, which I freaking love. It's just all these different colors. But when you go through it, you sometimes will check in with the crowd and say, like, what are some of the observations? What's standing out to you from what you've learned so far? And I had this one leader just raise his hand, and he was like one of the partners. And he just said, Sandy, I cannot believe after going through this, because I had them meet with their teams, that as I interview people, I specifically am trying to find people who aren't like me. So I'm like thinking, I need diversity on my team, different ways of thinking, different ways of approaching the process. And here I sit with a team full of all reds. The point was he intentionally tried to interview people who were different than him and still landed with an entire team just like him. He's like, so basically I hire me.
Yeah.
I hire me. I was not surprised at that at all. So he was like, I've got to shake something up in my interviewing process. I've got to figure it out because even when I'm trying not to, I'm still attracted to me.
Yeah.
And so that story really popped out at me as I was prepping for it because we are the most comfortable with ourselves, our leadership style, and the way that we communicate and do things is what seems right, actually. And that's actually the wrong part.
Yeah.
Is that we feel like our way is the right way. We intuitively know that that's not the case. Like if you're like learned about leadership, that's not the case. But even subconsciously, sometimes we just do it. We just think, oh, I love the way.
Well, and so much of that stuff happens on a subconscious level all day long. It's like when we talk to people about, different team norms and like, call the meeting mode in a meeting to avoid conflict. But then you go throughout your week and you actually hit those, bump up against that hundreds of times and never think to implement it because it's kind of just happening at a subconscious level.
Yes.
Like I'm brainstorming and you're trying to decide and we just got out of our training about how to call the meeting mode and we don't do it because it's just kind of like happening, you know?
Yeah. It's just happening. Yeah. So what we're going to be focusing on today relative to that story is that we do first have to know ourselves in order to lead others that are very different around us.
All right, member shout out. So Jay had a really cool story. I think I love to when people share them with us. Sometimes we have to kind of remember what happened and write it down. But Jay was sharing with us that he, one of his goals in coaching was he wanted to eventually get promoted to a higher level. And so for him, the next steps were all about like growing his team in order to get to that next level.
Yeah.
And what happened in the coaching was realizing, I actually need to approach my leadership chain with a proposal and a plan and kind of like strategize with them, which I love. I love the kind of co-creating approach. By the way, I was not involved in any of this, so I'm not like kudos to myself. I love when that happens because I think it's a really smart and effective way to do it. But he kind of made that plan in the coaching session and then talked to his leadership chain, kind of co-created with them a plan. And not only did it move from like nothing was happening to they said, hey, next month, we want you to step into, this next level. But it actually all resulted in him being able to get on a promotion path that was going to be a year sooner than what it was going to be. So I thought that was a really cool just example of how he stepped into that intentionality and then like saw immediate results actually because he was just getting intentional and had a plan.
That's such an encouraging one. What I love hearing about that one is that it was about helping him strategize around the conversation. Do you agree that we get so many coaching clients who just ask us how to have conversations?
Oh, that's such a huge one. Yeah.
It is.
It's funny, like if my family or something is trying to understand what coaching looks like, I think of that sometimes. Like, well, a lot of times it's just kind of like practicing what you're going to say or coming up with how you're going to approach something.
Right. What should I say? Empowering them to do it, giving them a place to practice. And if they hadn't had the conversation, this wouldn't happen.
Oh, man.
So I love it.
Shout out, Jay. Nice
Yep.
work.
Back to our question around leading a whole bunch of different people. I thought what I would begin with, I just mentioned before that you have to know yourself. Okay, so how do, first of all, I mean, I know we live with ourselves, but what are ways that you guys throughout the years have just tried to know yourself more?
Well, for me, this is actually, I love this question because it'll show up so different for different personalities. So I can't wait to see what you say, Jacqueline, because the first thought that came to my mind was a lot of times I will read books or listen to talks or read papers, not for the content of the message, but because it sparks other thoughts for me.
Oh, yeah.
That's just how my brain works. I'm a dot connector. So like I will listen to a podcast episode, totally not remember what they said, but it'll actually like spark something for me in terms of self-awareness or like a new idea. So that's often an approach for me.
Yeah. I feel like this is a newer like practice for me of like knowing myself. I'm still pretty young, especially in my career too. And I think I'm just learning, what exactly does that look like? And I think I've been keying into, and Steve, you've talked about this before, but it's been a while since you've taught on it, but just noticing, just trying to pay attention like throughout the day.
Sure.
How and where do I show up? And what does that look like? How do I feel about it? But trying not to like pass any judgment or draw any conclusions from it. Just simply notice, oh wow, I got more keyed up in that meeting because I was really passionate about what the project was or whatever. So
which is huge. It feels in a culture that's so action based, it feels so passive. Like, what do you mean you noticed? How'd you do that? And it's like,
and even
no,
as
that
I'm
is
saying
actually
it,
the thing.
it totally feels not actionable at all. But but
it really is.
It really is. And we have a practice as a team where we do that every week. When we do our planning at the end of the week, we say, what did you learn? And it's funny because it's almost like, it's like it can happen in religion where it's such a pattern for us now that sometimes you just get lazy and you're just like, I don't know, I learned this and this. But if you actually like engage with the process, it becomes very formative in terms of like self-awareness and growth. Another practice that we have and that we help teams with is regular feedback. And I think for me, one way I try to gain out of that is just by like my practice has become when someone shares feedback, or maybe I'm even just like noticing a hint of something, is kind of like trying to draw more out, saying things like, oh, thanks for sharing that, because then you'll tell me more. Whereas, if you're like, we're all hesitant to give feedback sometimes. And then if I react negatively, you're not going to share more. But if I'm like, oh, thanks for sharing that, you'll probably tell me more. And then I can actually learn something from it. What about you?
It's been such a journey of knowing how to notice myself, but I think I do a lot of like, how did I feel in that moment, being aware of it. But of course, I'm freaking crazy about all personality assessments. And people who are like, on them, it's not, the main thing about it is that it just brings more awareness to myself, so that I actually can be a better leader. One of the very first big aha ones I had in my 20s when I took one of them, maybe it was Myers, was that I was like a butterfly, and that I could just fly from one place to another, fly away, land, and finish absolutely nothing. And it was just like,
wait, that's such a funny picture.
But I was like,
but you can
totally, on.
Yeah, you can totally picture it for sure.
I motivate this group of flowers, and then I'm like, I motivate this group of flowers, and I'm like, see ya.
I am loving how the metaphor itself is actually spot on too.
Yeah, it feels very spot on.
But I could have been like, what? You poor little sad girl that can't. No. And then I thought, all right, so what? That must be how I'm showing up sometimes. So what can I do opposite of that to make sure that I put processes in place? And you guys have been just amazing at that for me. I've finished more things in my life ever than when I've been a part of Greenhouse, because you've tapped into the opposite sides of me. But I've also just pushed myself.
Process.
Yeah.
It makes me think. You got me reflecting now. Like personality assessments, I agree, they're so helpful. They can definitely become dogmatic or be used in
type you.
Yeah,
that's not how I see it.
Right,
but it
or
can.
to for blame or for excuses.
Oh, I'm
but
not.
all that aside,
sorry, I can't finish anything. It says so in the personality assessment.
But all that aside, I think what makes them so helpful, like I'm just thinking about in reality, it's not me taking it. It's me taking the same one, like. The team, me and my wife, like taking the same one.
Yes.
if you're doing it together with the people you're around all the time, then it kind of finds its way into the conversation all the time. I mean, that's probably every day at home. We're saying some kind of personality reference
Me too.
to something, but that's
Love it.
what helps us to kind of start seeing.
Right. So
the
there's a
patterns.
season of life sometimes where it's just about individual awareness. But when you get into leadership and also working with a team, I love that. Like
Yeah, it's good.
to see also that same story that I told you with that group with Insights Discovery, at the end of it, or about 3/4 in, I made everyone stand up and stand in 4 sections of the room.
Oh, yeah.
Relative to, I want my
Love
blues
that.
over there, my reds over here. And there was 2 blues and hundreds of reds. There
Yeah.
was only 50 people there, so I'm totally exaggerating.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying? And there was like tons of yellows and very few greens. So I stood in the middle and I was like, blues, what do the reds need from you? Reds, what do the yellows? And I went around and did this thing. And it's because we will always lead naturally. Like if I'm a sunshine yellow, as a sunshine yellow, but those blues do not need me to do that for them all the time.
Yeah.
So good.
Gosh, that's so good.
Yeah, I love that exercise where you kind of visually show
you're like,
the
look.
distribution
Yes,
and
the
then talk
distribution
about
in the
it.
company.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was no surprise with a PR group that there was a lot of yellows and reds, which are bright and more extroverted than the other two, because that's what they do, right?
yeah.
So on that one, I feel like step one, if you ask me, how do I lead a team with a whole bunch of different people, is start by making sure you know yourself. Because you can't adjust if you don't truly know yourself. And by the way, you'll keep learning about yourself. You'll never
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah.
But really make sure that you've gotten some feedback, that you've tapped in there too. So I thought the next thing I would do is, I thought I would just call out, and feel free to jump in here with, what are some of the just obvious different things that I notice that people, one of it that is obvious is the introvert and the extrovert, right? We've talked about this one to death, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but it's just extroverts will sometimes speak out loud to think, and introverts will hold in their thoughts and then have their best thoughts later. So they will think more internally. So if you are not thinking about how you lead, or if you're only expecting your team to lead like you could assume that the quiet people in the room are not contributing very much. And that is not the case. They're just not doing it like you. So here's some other ones. We're motivated by different things, right? Some people process information differently than I do, right? Some people, this one is so interesting. Some people just wake up every morning with a competitive mindset, and some people just want to get along. So it's just like if you're not thinking of I could be annoyed by, I got to figure out you. If I'm your leader, I need to know if you're motivated by competition or if you're motivated by getting along.
Yep.
2 that come to my mind.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Some want to talk. Some want to be freaking left alone. Know those people. Don't annoy them with every little thought that you're having, because it's actually, especially if you're their leader, they're afraid to say sometimes, you're actually completely botching my concentration by telling me every thought that you're thinking. So know them, ask them. And I actually talk about, at the end of this, is putting together a bit of a basic questionnaire for new hires. So we'll cover that a little bit as well. Let me see. Some are very urgent in their personality, and some are like lackadaisical. They know when to be urgent, but it's not in their nature to be naturally urgent. Some people focus on people. Some people focus on tasks. Some people focus on process, and others on outcome. I mean, that's 4 different.
I was going to say that alone could cause
that one.
so many conflicts.
Yeah.
Too. Or missing, maybe missing the end goal if you're not aware of what everyone is motivated by. That's really
Absolutely.
interesting.
Like, even if you just ask those 4 when someone is hired, which one, when you wake up in the morning, do you focus more on the people around you, the outcomes, the tasks?
Yeah.
What was the other one? I can't remember.
Wait, can we pause there for a second? Like,
Yeah.
what would y'all say personally? Like, what are the 4 again?
So it's people, tasks, process, or outcomes.
People, tasks,
And
process, or outcomes.
And I'm sure, for me, it definitely, I think about different things that I'm doing throughout the day, probably shift. But I would say, without thinking about that, I would say people. Like, just people first.
Yeah.
How about you guys?
Yeah. Mine is people.
Yeah, I agree definitely that it shifts depending on what I'm working on. But I would say if I was like to wake up and start thinking about work, I think about the people. But then I would say very, very close behind that is outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah.
I am very thankful
Yeah.
for that.
Mm.
Yeah, I definitely, let's see.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one thing to note on this is because I know when I was first hearing these messages and in trainings about this topic,
Yeah.
I remember being really frustrated. And I was the type who would kind of sit and think deeply and have all these notes and then like come up to the instructor at the afterward.
Yeah.
I was one of those annoying people. There's like
Yeah.
always 2 or 3 who like come up afterward
Yep.
and the person's like, I'm spent. And
Oh,
you have
I
all these
know.
questions for them. Because my question was, well, if you lead 100 people, you can't logistically know everyone on this level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I don't understand how this
Mhm.
works because most leaders asking these questions start to lead a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And, what I've come to believe over time and through coaching leaders is I think that's where you got to put in layers.
Absolutely.
So if you
Thinking the
if
same
you
thing,
actually
yeah.
lead 20 people, like direct reports to you, it's too many. You can't
Yeah.
know all of them on that level. And
Yeah.
thus what you resort to is leadership frameworks and tactics that you apply blanket to everybody the same.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And there are definitely a need for some amount of those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if you take the cookie cutter approach in things like communication styles, it ain't going to go well. And so I would always work with that leader to like, how could you narrow down the amount of direct reports you have and
Yeah.
create a layer? Maybe you just
Right.
have 4 people and the rest
Yeah.
report to those 4.
Yep.
And then you're kind of leading those 4 better and kind of training them on how to lead the ones under them the same way.
That's exactly right. It's that if your company can set it up as a structure like that, that's the best way. That's the best way to do it. If you still have a large group though, the way that I would encourage people is to just, even in the moments when you're having a one-on-one conversation with any human being, just quiet your inner loud voice and just notice. Just start just picking up on little things like, what are the things that they consistently say? And I tell people, write it down. Like if you have, just make a quick note. Or they tend to come back to me with their thoughts later. Or I've noticed that they write a better email than have a conversation.
Yeah.
Just small observations will help you lead differently. Just don't assume, just even if you just lead with the assumption of not assuming that everyone thinks like you will be a better leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I recently went, actually, when I was at that same PR group recently, I was there early and they had another speaker going before me, which Steve knows I freaking love because I get to observe someone else being a speaker and have a moment of observation or a moment of learning or checking in with what do I appreciate about them as a speaker. Well, this particular topic was on diversity and inclusion. And I guess they had this group come in 6 times throughout the entire year. It was like little mini trainings over diversity and inclusion for this company. I think they called it DEI. Everybody has a little bit of a spin there. And one of the things that the 2 women leading had them talk about was, what is your, and you may be like, where are you going here? I promise I have something. She said, every single one of us has a privilege and every single one of us has a poverty. And she made the small groups share their privilege and share their poverty. It was like some people who, the poverty one was the hardest because people feel like, it feels like such an extreme word, right? But we all have something compared to. And so anyways, what she was trying to pull out there was some themes. Some people said that their poverty was that they were raised in the middle of Kansas with nothing else to do but their high school and maybe 2 shops. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas other people who they worked with who were raised in Chicago just already bring to the workplace a different, in their mind, maybe better mindset, right? So my point there is our backgrounds in and of itself is a difference to be aware of. Where you were raised, what part of the country you're from, right? Your own family dynamics, those will all bring into play what they show up for that you also need to just listen for.
Yeah.
That was one. So different backgrounds, skills. Why is it that I can do something really easy and you're like, oh my gosh, that was so hard for me? Or why is it that you can do something so fast and amazing and I'm like, that took me 3 hours? Just notice that not everyone is great at all skills. And don't assume that. Really, I love the way you do this, Steve, with us, is that you really look for our sweet spots and let us lean more into those.
I know. And I'm sitting here feeling the tension of like, but it's easy for me. I have a small team.
True.
What do you
True.
say to the leader who's listening to this going like, how in the world do I do this for 10 people? I'm the busiest one on the team.
Yeah.
They're all different. They all want me to change who I am to
That's
meet
how
who
people
they
feel.
are.
Right.
Like, where do they go? Where do you go with that?
I think I'm just going to go back to your first one. The first one is that I think you should have a team of 4 or 5 that do that for you. If you're that high up as a leader. However, if you have a team of 10, I do think it's just about how important is it to you. If it's important to you, then in your one-on-ones, you're just going to keep notes. You're just going to keep small notes around what it is that you observe and notice.
Okay, so that's helpful. Like, so I'm playing devil's advocate here. 'Cause I'm
Sure.
like, all day long, I can't do this.
Right.
Can't way too much. And you can't adjust yourself all day long. But if I could isolate it to just my one-on-ones,
one-on-ones.
there's a
Yeah.
starting point. Like,
Yeah.
every time I get in a one-on-one, I'm going to be like, okay, change mode.
Right.
In this
Here
meeting,
comes that
I'm going
extrovert.
to approach it differently. I'm going to
Yeah.
think about their
Yeah.
needs.
Absolutely.
After the one-on-one, turn it off and go back to being myself.
Yes.
It's too exhausting to do that all day.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you don't meet with those people all day either, too.
Right.
But I think where it really counts, great call out there, is in your one-on-ones.
That's
a very tangible
that to me
one.
is a very tangible starting point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people are like, what are one-on-ones?
Yeah. Yeah. We've worked with companies that hadn't even started those yet.
Yeah.
They
But
are.
I think that's part of why they're
Yeah.
so helpful. It's like it is a designated time and place to
Yeah.
do these things that need to be done regularly, but you're usually too busy
Yeah.
to do them.
And I'm trying to think if there's any other ones that just come. Oh, some just need a lot of explanation. Some don't want any explanation at all. Some trust easy. Some don't trust quickly. They they want to earn trust. Some are really open to authority and some buck authority. I was just thinking about those. Any other ones that come to your mind at all?
Yeah, sometimes people, I mean, I'm still thinking on the personality assessment track, and a lot of them point out what people need in order to, go get the job done.
Right.
And those can be so vastly different that, that's a helpful one to know, because it's literally what the workplace is like people delegating work to other people.
Yep.
And if they don't have what they need, they can't do it.
Yep.
I very much need lots of context. If you give me the lay of the land, I can go do anything. But I often in my first jobs would get no lay of the land.
Yeah.
And then they'd be like, go. Like, I don't know anything. Or some people need the opposite. They need to just have a very clear defined goal and take off running. Context throws them off. They're like, stop telling me all this stuff. Or some people really need to kind of have a clear plan of action. There's a few different ones.
You said that's so good, because if you think about it, your next episode, I think, is a little bit talking about a little bit of advocating for yourself.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
And how advocating for yourself comes up all the time in coaching. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're a leader and you're having thoughts, but you're also under a leader, either way, voice what it is that you need more or less of.
Yeah.
So if you notice that every time we get in, I explain the crud out of things and you're like, I don't need all that. Just say, hey, by the way, I'm not one that needs all those details. I'm good with just some bullet points there.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to share what on both sides, as the leader and as a listener, what you need. And I know that the ones that are being led feel afraid to tell their leaders that.
Yeah.
But a good leader wants it.
It's so funny. I'm thinking about how often this comes up in workshops with teams. It's so funny to me how often any problem in the workplace can be solved with just talking about how we do the work. But we breeze by that because we're all busy doing the work.
Yeah.
It's like if you just took 20 seconds and talked about hey, actually, when you come and give me this stuff, you don't need to explain all that.
Right.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Cool. So how do you... And then done, a huge conflict is solved.
Yep. Yeah.
Instead, we let it boil up for 5 years and then
then maybe we
quit and
quit.
everyone's angry. And it's literally how it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also the other thing you and I joke about all the time about is how many things can be solved by simply asking.
Mm-hmm.
So it's exactly what you said. It's just ask.
Just ask.
But
When in doubt, ask.
Just ask. Yeah. That terrifies people, and people don't go there. They don't research it.
Yeah.
All right. So I don't want to belabor this. Know yourself, know others, start to observe. But I have 5 just steps towards stepping into it. That doesn't feel, it's a little bit of his mindset. Number 1 is just familiar yourself with the basics of human diversity, which is what we just talked about. Just understand that the list above is just a small list. And if you understand that you're different and others are different, that's step 1. That's it. Number 2, also value their differences. Instead of tolerating their differences, value them. Learn to value the way. And especially if you're patient with someone, and, oh man, you probably have hired someone or worked with someone before where at first you're like, I'm not sure this is going to work out. There's just such a difference in the way that they approach the work. But if you're patient as a leader and figure out what is the issue and what's holding them back or motivating, sometimes you could have this incredibly shiny star under there, but your initial response was they were so different from you that you weren't sure you could even work together. But just keep pulling from them to find their best sweet spot.
Yeah.
So value it. Value it.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Number 3 is just, as a leader, have an onboarding process that includes the getting. So people, what do you think of when you think of onboarding process? Like people say what?
Yeah, it's so often either just like a huge handbook that doesn't actually get used, or it's non-existent.
Yeah.
Either way, it's not realistic and actually helpful.
Yeah.
But like these questions are very helpful and help you to shortcut a lot of those problems.
So have a good conversation around revisiting what you want your onboarding process to be besides here's your computer, here's how you use it. Let your onboarding process be who are you as a person, and hey, by the way, this is who I am. So it could look like a series of 5 or 6 questions that you consistently ask people as they come in, and also a consistent personality assessment that you get and then you share with the team, and the team also shares theirs. Like, so every time as someone's hired, you'll be like, hey, just going back to insights again. So this group over here, we have greens and we have a lot, very red heavy teen. Welcome. You're the only blue. Good luck.
Yeah.
We really needed you,
Yeah.
you know?
And it's also great questions for one-on-ones. We've already said that, but I want to highlight that because we often hear like, I don't know what to do in my one-on-ones. It just becomes status updates. Like I don't have any good questions to ask or anything. And some of these simple questions, not only are they good because they are, it's information you need. More important than that is it creates the awareness for the first time.
Yeah.
What we see as coaches is most of the time you're like, hey, what did you ask us earlier? Like, what's your motivation style?
Yeah.
And we both sat there like, oh yeah, good question. That's often what happens is people are like, I've never thought about it.
Sure.
So here it is, causing problems and hiccups and road bumps all the time, every day in the work.
Yeah.
All the dysfunction stems from these things. And then we're all like, oh, I've never thought about that. It's like, so even just the act of thinking about it for the first time can open a whole bunch of good things.
Yeah.
And by the way, in our downloads, I will have a list of at least 5 questions for you to just start with. You can change them relative to the culture of your company, but some people are like, could you just give me a starting place?
That's good. And that's helpful if you don't really have the time or budget or ability to do like a whole personality assessment.
Yeah. And I'll also list the top personality assessments that we've used that we've noticed have been successful. Those just as a starting place there. But by the way, think about it. If you're hired into a company and they take that much time to get to know you, already, what are you feeling? Like, I'm feeling like I'm so happy about my choice that you wanted to know how I work and you wanted me to know how you work.
Yeah.
So number 4 is, while this is not going to happen overnight. So just from that onboarding process, you're not going to be like, we get each other. It's not going to happen. In your one-on-ones and delegating work, just make sure the expectations are clear about the work, because that is how you're going to figure out how this person best ticks.
That's a great point. Say a little more about that though.
So when I give you a project, I might say something like, what did you hear? What did you hear the timelines were? Is there anything you need more or less of to get this project done? How does the timeline feel? What did you hear me say the timeline was? Thinking about everything I can think of around that project to make sure I understand, because we've all been given projects before and been like, yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
And then you get into it, and it's like, I don't have it.
The space to say do, and the safety.
Right.
We talk about how everyone needs safety and trust. Everyone's always asking, create it right away. What about that project or assignment that I gave you is giving you some reserve? What about it are you excited about?
Yeah.
What do you need help
Well,
with?
and what I
think?
love there is that very question creates some safety and trust. I always get a little irked when we're talking about that topic and people will be like, but it takes like years to build safety and trust. You have to like show over and over that you follow through on what you said you'd do and that you're a trustworthy person. I'm like, yes, like in the perfect, utopian sense of it.
Sure.
Yeah, I get it. But like a tiny thing like asking, all right, what did you hear me say? Let me make sure we're on the same page.
Yep.
Boom, that built some safety and trust. It's like those little things help a lot. You don't have to wait till it's perfect.
You don't. My last one, number 5, is just debrief. So again, just like I said, expectations after every project or every big goal that your group has worked with, debrief the crud out of it. How did that feel to you? Is there anything you'd like to change about? It's like what you're noticing is how they're different from you and what they need more or less of moving forward.
Right.
So always clear expectations and a great debrief.
Yeah. Resist the urge to move on too quickly and then
Yeah.
just keep making the same mistakes
Yeah.
over and over.
And then forever they're frustrated, and then you lose this really great person that could have just, 1 or 2 conversations could have removed the frustration.
You know what I always think? Because I always feel like, there's not enough time for that.
What?
You know who does this so well is certain branches of the military, like a
tell me
SEAL
more.
team. They will never not debrief
Never.
how something went.
No.
Who has less time if anyone has urgent things going on, it's people
do.
in those roles. So
Yeah.
if they have the time to always debrief, I'm pretty sure in our office
and think
job,
about how critical their debrief is too. It's life or death, the
Yeah.
debriefing that they're doing often. And so if they miss the debrief, something to prepare for the next thing, we might have lost a life here. So they do it well.
Yeah.
The last framework that I just want to show you that's not part of the 5, and I'm not actually going to go into it just because it's so many personality assessments, but I know that one of our team members recently delivered a workshop on the working genius.
Mm-hmm.
And the 3 words on a slide that really stood out to me that were just like, oh my gosh, if you could just figure out who shines in these 3 words, it would just help you so much, which is ideation, activation, and implementation. Like, who on the team is great at the ideas, who's great at the who's great at the implementation. If you could just even create that as a rhythm of conversation, because you put me into the 3rd one too much, the implementation, and you're going to notice that I'm struggling, right? But you put me in ideation, same as and activation. Those are going to be the 2 that implementation is going to be my hardest one.
Yeah, I agree, because I think one of many negative consequences of the work system we have now with its performance management systems and stuff is we're trying to mold everyone into a perfectly well-balanced human with equal amounts of all 4 of those colors.
Oh, Lord.
That's actually what the system is built to do.
Yes.
But it's completely wrong. In my opinion, it's completely wrong, because you can't get everyone perfectly balanced, and you actually don't want that anyway. I'd rather have you shine at what you're great at, you shine at what you're great at.
I agree.
But when subconsciously we're expecting everyone to be perfectly balanced, then we get frustrated they're not, which they never will be. So
No, never.
I like that. It's a good point.
Awareness of the other type is different than trying to become it.
Right.
Yeah. So after all of this, we gave some practical tips, but if you just remember that the bottom line is to just not assume that people work their best work the way that you do, you will already win as a leader and leading people who are different than you. And I always remember that as a leader, it's not really about me. If I'm truly a leader, it's actually about you. So where Greenhouse can help, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I loved some of these ideas, there's always an option to pick up a coaching session to just have a personality assessment done for you if you're in that, I just want to know myself. But we also do tons of team workshops where we come in and we will do the assessment, gather all the information, and have a really great time delivering the results so that your team can better know each other.